to Dr. Janet Gerson, who is also a longtime member of the network and a leader and taken on many different roles and many different hats, one of which she's gracing us with this morning. So welcome to the panel, Janet. Dr. Gerson is a political theorist, a writer, artist, and activist educator who has taught peace education, conflict resolution process, transformative learning, and envisioning futures. She is education director of the International Institute on Peace Education and former co-director of Peace Education Center at Teachers College, Columbia University. Her research and writing focus on the interrelatedness of dignity, justice, democracy, and peace. And she has a recent book out, Reclaimative Post-Conflict Justice, Democratizing Justice in the World Tribunal on Iraq, which she co-authored with Dale Snauwaert. And she's going to use some of her learnings from that book to grace us with today. So welcome and take it away.
Thank you, Phil. And thank you for the wonderful presentations of Michael and David, which get at some of the issues that I'm going to speak about. I'm very happy to be on this panel with you. I want to point out that my colleagues are, including Tony Gaskew, are all professors and all are professionals in institutions having to do with law and justice. And often in incidents that happen in the news, we may say, wait, the law says this, but that seems illegitimate to us. Wait, that doesn't align with my sense of justice. And I think therapeutic jurisprudence, for example, is attempting to bring more coherence to legal practice, legal policies, legal institutions, law, and how it's used. I think about justice from a relational paradigm for justice, which includes the interrelatedness of dignity, justice, democracy, and peace. So rather than a narrow, coherent picture, it's a more horizontal and relational perspective, even among these concepts. How is justice connected to democracy? How is dignity possible, a principle? Martin Luther King said, famously, justice anywhere is the concern of all of us. It's just injustice for all of us. And recently, Michelle Moody Adams has written on his work, expanding the idea of conscientious citizenship. So if you think of what do we mean by citizenship? Well, technically, under the law, many people who are residing right around us are not citizens. And people who are displaced have no citizenship, which can assure or institutionalize their rights with processes and mechanisms they can address that problem. So if you think about what justice is, there are actually many definitions which are instituted in legal systems and in legal institutions and in academic teachings and in other ways that we think about justice. When we think of injustice, it more likely can be that everyone can object and say, this is wrong, we need more justice. Think of Black Lives Matter, think of the anti-globalization movement, and think of the anti-war movement, the topic of my book, Reclaimative Post-Conflict Justice. In 2003, there were globally coordinated, the largest anti-war movement ever to take place that revolved around the globe over the weekend of February 15, 2003. People all over the world objected to the proposed attack of the United States and the UK and United Kingdom on Iraq. Nevertheless, those 8 million or so voices were ignored by the powers that be. And not only did the US and the UK attack Iraq in a shock and awe aggression, but the United Nations, after 6 weeks, appointed the aggressors as the occupation authority. People were further outraged because voices were ignored of citizens of the world, which is an informal category, not a legal category. It's conceptual and relatedness category. But people wanted to find a way to move beyond protest. And what they did was form a tribunal. Well, what's a tribunal? People's tribunals or citizens' tribunals are public formations or platforms in which to, in a sense, fill in the gaps between legal and official courts, long-standing regular courts. And they are an alternative to official authorities like the United Nations, which the people organizing this tribunal thought failed to act on their own principles, their own mandate for peace in the world and sovereignty of states. So tribunals, each tribunal has to organize their own definition of justice and their own purposes. Let me give 2 prototypes of post-conflict justice tribunals. One is the retributive justice of the Nuremberg Tribunal. This was an international tribunal run by heads of state who were the victors of World War II. It was an international military victors tribunal. And because the people forming the tribunal had won, they took because they were the winners, they tried the losers. And so there was a sense of unfairness, a victor's tribunal that included punishment of German Nazi leaders of the war. So it was also a domination and control model, a hierarchical model in that sense. The United States was never tried for its what would be called crimes of war. On the other hand, law was generated. The law of genocide, the crime of genocide, and the crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression were at least formulated at this time. So tribunals can also generate law. And although law can be institutionalized, it's also generative. And I think that's what therapeutic jurisprudence is reaching at. A second tribunal prototype in post-conflict justice is restorative justice. The South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission is a national example. Here, people had to keep living together in the regional area of South Africa. And because the government had fallen and people were killing each other, besides the apartheid system of discrimination and oppression institutionalized in South Africa fell, but the government also fell, and their social organization and a restoration of society and people working together had to be restored. So this in a way relates closely to the crimes against humanity that were articulated in the Nuremberg Tribunal. So when it comes to the World Tribunal on Iraq, who formulated that? Global citizens. It was a project of global civil society. But what is that? It's not a legal or institutional definition. It was people of the world calling into account the leaders of the war and the profiteers of the war on behalf of the Iraqis, which wouldn't go in a real court. They said, who are we? Where does our legitimacy come from? This is not a real legal tribunal. We have no institutional backing, but we are subjects to the law, whether we're citizens or not. And because we're subjects, we have a moral and a legitimate right to be authors of this call for accountability, authors of an alternative narrative and history of the war. And they said, we are calling, almost done, we are calling for the criminals who started this war to be called into account. But you can't, but at the same time, they didn't believe that law or government, many of them, could ever function to bring about a really legitimate society. But at the same time, you can't have crimes unless you have law. And so they articulated not only what would be the crimes of war, but also the violations that should be law and therefore could be crimes. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. You've really highlighted the whole notion of conscientious citizenship and what it means in relationship to the formal structures that both serve us and often undermine our sense of dignity and what it means to be human. So it's, as you were talking, I'm thinking each of you, we would love to spend a whole day on each of the topics, and I'm sure that's also going to be true when we hear from Dr. Gaskew. So thank you so much, Janet.